Welcome, IT changemakers, to the DEX Show with Tim Flower and Tom McGraw. Let's get into it.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the DEX Show within a show. It is, of course, Reality Bytes. We've got a great topic of discussion for today's episode, and I'm joined for it by Tim Flower. Hi, Tim. How's it going, mate?
Good, Tom. Welcome back from vacation. I hope you're rested and relaxed and ready to go.
And sharp as a tack, Tim. I promise you.
Yes, excellent.
In actual fact, it's been hotter in London while I've been away than it was in Lanzarote, Spain, if you can believe that. It's the way of the world, isn't it? And we've got Megan Brake with us. Hey, Megan, how you doing?
Hey, Tom. I'm doing good.
And we have got Dina El-Shoaf. How you doing, Dina?
I'm all good, Tom. Welcome
Excellent.
back.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And everybody's got to bear with me. I'm a little blunt and foggy-headed today, but we have got a very sharp and absorbing topic to discuss. It is all about synthetic data and its implications on DEX. So synthetic data is data that's artificially generated rather than produced by real-world events. And obviously, that's going to become more and more prevalent in all kinds of areas. You could say we've reached a bit of a crossroads even between real and synthetic data and data modeling. Of course, that's going to be precipitated in large part by the growth of AI. And Gartner, in fact, predicts that by 2024, more than 60% of AI model training data is going to be synthetic. But what we have to ask, as I say, is of course what are the implications going to be for digital employee experience? It's an area, after all, not only defined by data collection and analysis, but by definitively organic data. It's real world, user-based endpoint data. It's never been based on anything other than that. That's been its definition. So we're going to get into those implications, but first of all, Tim, I wonder if you could help us set the scene a bit with some positives, first of all, because obviously this is very, very powerful, pretty new technology, and there are presumably some sectors and some areas of IT that are going to benefit, first of all.
Yeah, so my experience, my previous employer was at the Hartford for 20 years, and we had a lot of internally developed applications. Companies want to differentiate themselves. They don't want to buy software off the shelf, and many times software off the shelf doesn't do what they need it to do, so they develop their own applications that are specific to not only to their company, but right down to very specific job functions. So in those scenarios where you're creating your own applications, you need some way on a net new application to test it. And synthetic transactions do a couple of things. They validate that each function within the app actually functions. You've got to be able to exercise the whole application and make sure that all of your coding is actually working and that the application is performing as it's intended to, and not just for one employee doing one set of tests, but under load. So synthetic transactions can not only give you employee-less testing, but it can place a significant load on the back end to also simulate lots of employees doing the same thing at the same time. And you just can't do that in a human way. You can't have 10,000 people all sitting at a keyboard, all pressing the same key at the same time. So the synthetic transactions and synthetic testing form a very unique and very valuable function in application development and rollout. I'm curious to see how the synthetic transactions and synthetic data now start to inform not only app developers and where they need to take their applications, but the AI models now, the AI data that we rely on when we ask ChatGPT a question. How much of that data is real data versus something that was synthetically created? I think it's an interesting question to ask.
Super interesting. And actually, when we were in the chat earlier, sort of discussing this before the show, Megan, you brought up the point that you potentially find a repetition or a reiteration of the famous watermelon effect. I wonder if you can maybe kind of explore that a little bit first of all, and some of the pitfalls that could come from the sudden insertion of so much synthetic data into this space.
Yeah, so as I was reading about this synthetic data just more generally after the topic got brought up, most of the examples that are provided are about testing for autonomous vehicles and testing for healthcare, not so much in IT. So I was kind of trying to think of more along what Tim was just saying, of what would it actually, how would it be applied, how would it be used in IT? And something that came up for me was this idea of like, everything that Tim just described is an obvious benefit, but when we extend it beyond the testing process and we take those conclusions and we push them out into a real environment, I think the thing to keep in mind is this idea of bias, right? And so bias coming into data sets has been a point of discussion almost as long as, from my point of view, this kind of synthetic data, the AI, has been a point of discussion, right? Like, and machine learning trained on white male faces is going to be more likely to select white male faces or recognize white male faces than it is to recognize female faces or faces from other races. Same thing when we look at this in the digital workplace. So let's say you're running one of these tests, as Tim was talking about, testing to see what's going to happen before we deploy this new software or new huge transformation project. The tests all come back and say, yeah, it's all going to be good. Here's the kinks. Okay, you iron out the kinks. Great. It's all going to be good. You roll it out and it comes back and it looks like it's all really great. Well, what about the real experience of employees? I feel like that's the thing that's getting left out again here. And that's the whole reason that this DEX approach that we're always talking about got put in place in the first place, right? Is a system can tell you that everything is fine, but an employee might be telling a different story, and their experience isn't reflected in the data. So as extremely valid and exciting as this kind of application of synthetic data may be, I think we have to be careful or be aware of, are we just going back to a world where it's that watermelon effect? On the outside, everything looks green and wonderful, but inside it's all red. So are we still keeping in mind the real lived experience of employees? I think synthetic data always needs to be balanced with real data if it's going to be used in a digital workplace.
And Megan, we used to ask the question, how do you know, right? You've tested this application, you've used synthetic transactions, now you roll it out, and the question to the app developers is, how do you know that the employees are actually functioning the way that you demonstrated they would in test? Right. And the answer typically was, well, we've deployed robots, we've deployed monitors, we've got synthetic transactions out in production, but it's still not the employee transactions, it's the synthetic transactions. So at a certain point, you've got to marry the two and make sure that reality matches what you did in a synthesized way.
Before reality bites, Tim, before reality
bites.
I want to get sort of, in a way, we've got kind of infusions of two relatively recent, completely different kinds of data. And I think, on the one hand, synthetic, on the other hand, sort of organic sentiment data. And I want to ask Dina about that kind of how they can potentially complement one another going forward. But first of all, Tim, this point of analogy about the kind of origins of NextThink itself, where the very kind of abstract data, very distant data was suddenly supplanted and kind of undermined, if you will, by much more meaningful endpoint data. And I was interested in your view of the relevancy of that analogy for this kind of present moment in technological development. Do you see a lot of parallels there?
Yeah, so I go back to as a pre-customer, as a prospect looking at NextThink, and I go back to my holy cow, this changes everything kind of a moment when I first saw it. And I think there's a similar, from an app dev standpoint, there's a similar reaction when they say, holy cow, look what I can synthesize, look what I can create without bothering the employees now. I can actually do this all on my own. And I think there's a little bit of a danger there in looking at that synthetic data as real. Technically it is real data. It is exercising the application. I look at the holy cow moment that I have, and honestly, almost every customer that I've talked to also has, in a little different way, because that holy cow moment is based on, to go back to the R word, reality. It's based on what's actually happening. And I think the holy cow moment for app developers, if they take it too far, a lot like AI, the holy cow moment with AI, if you take it too far or trust in it too much, it becomes a false security blanket, a false sense of security. So the analogy, I think, plays in that there is a holy cow moment. This changes everything, but it's got to be approached with some level of skepticism and caution.
Right. Let's get into it a little deeper then. Dina, in your view, how predictable are employee computing habits at large, in your view?
So if we're going to look at experience, the whole word itself describes itself. We can look at the hard data. We can look at this synthetic data that we keep on collecting. However, if we are not considering the sentiment aspect, how is it really put into place? And then we understand the predictability of the user behavior. Marry them both together, put a one big picture where you can see both of them apple to apple, you're going to get the real picture. This is the real picture. Otherwise, like Tim and Megan mentioned earlier, we're going to go back to the watermelon effect. We're going to go back to the fact that we have data that is way too much artificialized that you wouldn't know where is the user in it. And I think when we're talking about experience, one of the first points that we can start with is the user. That's a user journey. How can you tell a user journey without the user interaction? Yes, the purpose is to minimize the disruptions, but increase the communication, increase the connection. And there is a lot that would come into that end user experience that you're trying to measure, because you're not trying to measure the automated experience or how good are you at collecting the data without the user, or ignoring them altogether from the whole equation. So the accuracy of how the habits are being predictable, that's a very big topic that we need to talk about, because it's very hard. Even if you give people scripts to type these in or put in those steps or processes, everybody would add one little bit of flavor, even if they just mistype something. So that kind of user input, you still need to measure. You still need to keep including into measuring experience. Otherwise, we're only enhancing the productivity of the machine, and we're not looking at increasing the user productivity as we want to and enhancing their performance. So it's the man versus machine kind of thing. But for you to measure experience, I think we still need to maintain the user input into the equation.
There's other intangibles there too. The variability of an employee running and using an application versus synthetic transactions. Synthetic will execute based on a plan and a schedule and a certain set of steps, whereas an employee will do things in a similar way, but in an unstructured timing. Oh, and by the way, I also had Chrome running in the background. And oh, by the way, I was also streaming the football game. And oh, by the way, I also had, my personal application up at the time, which caused the conflict. So there's so many things that can vary in a user experience and a user execution of an app that synthetic testing and synthetic transactions just can't anticipate.
Agree. It's the full story behind the whole scene that would give you the insight on how you want to measure that, or even the experience numbers that we see, or the data that is being truthfully collected from the endpoint, etc. But not knowing the full story of the background of what the user is actually trying to achieve or do, or have running in the at the same time consecutively or parallel, it would be the missing part or the missing piece of you having the colors of the picture.
Do you feel, Dina, that there's a potential dynamic where the two types of data increasingly complement one another and inform one another?
100%. If you have the potential increase the amount of data being collected synthetically or dynamically or organically being generated from the endpoint directly, streamlined into a gigantic data lake, and you keep on having the inputs of the users, you will have better measurements for predictability of how they could be happening in the future. So you can have a bit of a preemptive analysis in the background, but still you would need the user input. Without the user input, after a while, it will just become a matrix of data and synthetic data without really having the capability to go and measure experience or taking full actions that would correlate with the real story in the user's eyes.
Megan, this is obviously an epiphenomenon, if you will, of a larger sort of societal and technological shift. To what extent, based upon what you've seen so far in what is looking like the era of AI's general explosion, how much grounds for sort of optimism are there in your view in terms of this potential for a kind of complementarity between man and machine, between the organic and the synthetic? Or do you see just sort of the former pulling off in it in a sort of aggressive direction, or do you see indications of there being some kind of conversation between what we can now do and what we want to see out of this technology?
You're asking me the really big questions, Tom.
Well, I reserve them for you, mate. You know.
I think that's an interesting question, right? As much as I think the really analytical minded of us want to believe that everything can be programmed into data sets and everything can be imagined with AI, I don't know. I feel like you can't ever underestimate the truly randomness of humans, and the ability for groups of humans to act in incredibly unpredictable ways. So, I think that this explosion of AI, if harnessed in a thoughtful way, has, of course, the ability to revolutionize. I mean, it's like another revolution, right? Another industrial revolution, I mean to say. Yeah, it has the ability to make our lives enhance them in so many different ways. I mean, from making it easier to predict how your digital workplace is going to behave to the sort of the first use of this, right, which is autonomous vehicles, getting a car that can actually read the road and anticipate what's going to happen so that, maybe we do away with traffic forever and the roads are always running smoothly because nobody's driving a car anymore. Obviously, that's like an idealistic and beautiful future. I think, though, that this conversation that we've had here today, hopefully the scientists who are working with this are much smarter than I am and have already thought of this, but you always need to be layering in that real experiential data. How are human beings really acting in this perfect setup that you've made with your synthetic data?
How much would you trust your Tesla, for example, if all of its anticipations in its autopilot were based on synthetic transactions of highway exits and speed limits and traffic? I wouldn't get in that car.
Yeah, nor would I be a pedestrian in that world.
What do you think, Dina? How taking a broader view? I know I said I reserve for big questions only for men. I don't really. Everyone gets them. What do you think, Dina? Taking the broader view of this kind of dynamic between, as you put it, man and machine. How do you think things are panning out so far, and where do you see them going?
I think we can use it nicely and wisely, but excluding the human interaction or the human opinion, then we're just going to be giving in. I am all pro finding trends, executing computations, finding all of the best and greatest stuff that we can into the data analysis and the data science that we can through GPTs and through AIs and all sort of new cool things. But we still need to have the human power as the supreme being, right? So we're still here. So as long as we're here, we need to be included in the equation. If we keep on just being into the synthetic data, then we're going to be part of a big simulation that we are not controlling.
Yeah, well said. And just bringing it back to the minutiae of the issue a little bit more, I wonder if you could, anyone can explain to me sort of some of the things that become more possible, more viable for IT teams not already covered with the advent of synthetic data, specific areas you can see it really starting to make a new difference.
What I hear from customers when they're talking about like our product, one of the new elements I think in Infinity, right, is that it's based off of our data pool, which comes from anonymized data from our customers using our product. But it offers like AI assisted suggestions of here's what to do next, here's a common fix for this issue that you're seeing. So maybe a use of synthetic data in the digital workplace at least is aggregating, okay, here's all these things that could happen. Here are the top 3 fixes you could try to address this issue that's been plaguing you for however long.
Agree, and you would still need a human to be validating those suggestions at the end of the day to say, is it worth it to chase? Is it wrong? Is it right? And what would be the best consulting or recommendation that you can have? So you can have the AIs in the background to do the cross-check for you, find the trends, quickly gather the anomalies in the customer's environments, but you still need the human aspect to validate if this is valid to be done, or it's just going to be a waste of time.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, Tom. I think the value of synthetic data, and I mentioned it at the outset, is just the sheer volume of data that you can get without depending on employees to do the work. In our space and in our product, especially with anonymized data over 15 million endpoints, you can now leverage that same benefit of a huge volume of data without relying on employees to do extra work, but it's based on real data. It's based on real employee interactions and not synthesized synthetic transactions. So you get the same benefit of huge volumes of data, very reliable data, no extra burden on employees, and now reliability to IT teams to take action on that huge volume of data.
Brilliant. Look, thanks for your insights, everyone, and thanks for bearing with me. I should have added at the top of the show, actually. I actually got in with the family from the airport to the house around midnight last night, and then got everyone to their first day of school at about 6:15, 6:30. So thanks for your patience with my very organic personal data set today. And some really good insights there. Thanks to Sean for suggesting this topic for the show. And we will have some links in the show notes to Infinity, which I think was very properly plugged by the various panelists today, because I think it's super relevant. And thanks for joining us, and we will see you at the next Reality Bytes.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
To make sure that you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast player. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, make sure to leave a rating of the show. Just tap the number of stars you think the podcast deserves. If you'd like to learn more about how NextThink can help you improve your digital employee experience, head over to nextthink.com. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.